Welcome to Fertility Friendly Food, the podcast. My name is Stephanie Vlakis and I'm an expert certified fertility dietitian and nutritionist and founder of The Dietologist, a multiple award-winning virtual fertility and pregnancy nutrition clinic serving thousands from around the world, and of course, the host of this pod, Fertility Friendly Food. This podcast is dedicated to all things health and nutrition in the world of fertility, reproductive health, and pregnancy. Each week, I bring you practical snack-sized episodes to help improve your lifestyle on your trying to conceive journey, alongside guest expert interviews to help inspire you to learn and grow whilst you grow your family. Welcome back, everyone. Now, this episode obviously comes with a significant trigger warning around pregnancy loss and miscarriage. This isn't something for you to tune into right now. That is not a problem. Skip on past, catch up on a past episode, and we are sending all our love to you. There will be resources linked in the show notes, particularly the Pink Elephant Support Network, who do incredible work in this space of supporting people in the times of grief and need when it comes to pregnancy losses of all kinds. So if you do need further support, please reach out to them. The link will be in the show notes. Now, before we get into this episode in a more deeper way, I want to make some really important distinctions and give some appropriate context here. When it comes to pregnancy loss and miscarriage, there is no single nutrition or dietary change that you can make that will guarantee you to prevent you from another loss, which is sad because that would be an absolute amazing miracle that everyone would be on. But many miscarriages and pregnancy losses are unexplained. Many are due to errant chromosomal abnormalities, which are issues with the embryo's genes. Sometimes it's not an inherited genetic issue from you or your conception partner. They are just random occurrences, which makes it hard to kind of find closure and work out your next step. The intention of this episode and sharing information about nutrition in the context of pregnancy loss and recurrent miscarriage is not to in any way replace this responsibility onto you to quote unquote do something to change your chances, because we know that nothing you did or didn't eat contributed to your loss. But the reality is many people we see here at the Dietologist in our virtual clinic, a miscarriage or a pregnancy loss such as termination for medical reasons or TFMR, stillbirth or neonatal loss. And it is so devastating and so life-altering for many. And many want to know what they can be doing, because it's only human nature to think if you change something that potentially it could change the outcome too. So a lot of the time we are making changes to make our minds feel better about moving forward, knowing that we are doing something different. However, I didn't want to shy away from this topic either, because it is so incredibly common. We know that 1 in 4 pregnancies end in a loss. So let's talk about it. No hiding in the shadows here. And for this conversation about recurrent miscarriage and nutrition, I have invited our incredible team dietitian, Candice Crellin APD from The Dietologist, back to the podcast to help us learn more, as recurrent miscarriage is a particular clinical interest area of hers. So welcome back, Candice.
Hey, Steph. How are you going? Great to be back on the podcast again.
So good to have you back, and particularly for this topic, because we've had many conversations about it on Instagram, and we've even done professional developments on it recently in our dietitian group, and it's such an important conversation, and I'm so glad to see more conversation about it. I'm not glad to hear that statistics are what they are, but I think people feel so alone, and so I think talking about it in the open is so much more powerful for people. No hiding about it.
Most certainly. And yeah, something I think if women can feel a bit more supported to talk about it, then it can probably lead to better outcomes for them in the long run, and just not feeling so alone in that time, which is really difficult to experience and go through. So any sort of support and understanding and education we can contribute to this area, I think is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we get into it today, let's get stuck into our community questions. So don't forget, you can leave us a question anytime. There is a simple 30-second question form. It's always linked in the show notes for you. Or if you're feeling brave, you can send us a voice memo on Instagram at @the_dietologist, and we can play your question on the pod. So today's question is very relevant. How much of an impact can diet and lifestyle changes really have when it comes to pregnancy loss? I think a lot of people feel quite resigned to the fact that many miscarriages are due to chromosomal abnormalities and we have no control over that. So then they feel that making a change to their lifestyle becomes kind of redundant. So what are your thoughts on this, Candice?
Yeah, look, I think there's certainly an element that nutrition can't help with. So if there's any sort of underlying medical reasons for a pregnancy loss, then nutrition isn't going to essentially change that. But if nutrition can assist to improve that medical condition, that can certainly play an important role. So I guess it really sort of depends on what a person's diet and lifestyle looks like to start off with. And there's certainly a lot of things that we can be doing in terms of what we're eating and how that improves things like the quality of our egg and then the quality of a male sperm as well. And those things are really important when it comes to producing the healthiest embryo possible to have a successful pregnancy. So it certainly, it's not the be all and end all, but we do see that it makes a huge difference. And we know that what we eat sort of in that 3 to 6 months preconception plays a huge role in terms of the DNA that is present in that embryo and therefore the health of your eventual baby as well. So look, I think overall, it plays a really big role. And I guess, we're a little bit biased in that it's what we do. And so therefore, we certainly do think that it has a huge implication. But look, we know that there's heaps from a nutrition point of view that we can do to help people in this area. And it's something that's controllable. And I think that's probably one of the most important aspects of it is there's a lot around pregnancy loss that is out of your control, but this is one that is in your control. So we grab that by both hands and run with that, I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most powerful part of it is feeling like something is in your control can feel so empowering when you're in that, at the mercy of nature kind of moment or at the mercy of doctors or at the mercy of the circumstance. And I think so many people find that comforting. And I think another perspective is it's just self-care in general. Like, I know we've got this idea that self-care is going to the day spa and sitting in a bubble bath and lighting a candle, but literally the most basic form of self-care is to look after your body, to exercise, to eat well, to look after your mental health. And there's some of the biggest challenges people face. And when we're faced with grief and loss and uncertainty and despair, those things do go out the window and they do all suffer. And so refocusing your attention on it, whether it be from a miscarriage perspective or even just from a preconception, again, perspective, if you choose to try again, I think is so, so valuable and can't be underestimated, not just for your physical well-being, but for your mental well-being, your mental mindset kind of perspective. Awesome. So on to today's episode, Candice, about recurrent miscarriage and nutrition. First of all, how do we define recurrent pregnancy loss medically, and what are some of the statistics around that?
Yeah, so I guess we call recurrent miscarriage or recurrent pregnancy loss as having 2 to 3 consecutive miscarriages. So some medical centres will use 3. I think we tend to lean more towards 2 because having to experience 2 in a row is certainly enough to warrant some further investigation. So we know that it affects less than 5% of couples compared to the sort of 25% of your one-off miscarriage. So it is a smaller percentage, but it's still, quite huge. And I think we certainly probably see a bigger proportion in our clinic as well, just people that are seeking that extra help. So we know that around 50% of the time it has no identified cause either. And so people will come to us and there's no sort of reason, or, it's sort of unexplained at that stage. So yeah, I think it's certainly an area that needs a lot more work from a medical perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to get more attention medically, we need to talk about it a lot more. It's a big burden for people who have faced loss to be the ones to talk about it. It feels like why is it my job? And it's not your job. It isn't. But I think stories are the most powerful way that we get attention. And I think sharing stories, if you feel up to it, is just so valuable for the cause beyond just yourself. And it's good to see that some things are changing. I've seen the pink elephants, there's now miscarriage leave, and there's now pregnancy loss leave, and that's being implemented in some massive corporate companies here in Australia. And it's good to see, because it is loss, it is grief, and it is bereavement. And so we should have options for people to grieve that loss accordingly. So it's only natural to want to know why a pregnancy has ended so devastatingly. It brings some closure for some, or helps other people feel comforted if they continue to pursue growing their family with another pregnancy, perhaps. What kinds of investigations are typically done by fertility doctors or obstetricians to find out what might be going on when it comes to recurrent pregnancy losses?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's really important, if you've experienced recurrent pregnancy loss, to have things checked out and to see if there is an underlying cause. And sometimes you have to push a little bit to get some of those extra investigations done. But I guess that's all part of being able to know and understand what might be contributing to that as well, which is why we're having this conversation now. So we know that about 50% of miscarriages are occurring due to a chromosomal abnormality or a genetic abnormality, as you've said, and there really isn't a lot that we can do about that. But if we're thinking about what some of the underlying causes that we can identify might be, we can start to look at a few different things that we can investigate. And I guess part of that is, when someone's experienced miscarriage, it is very hard to feel like it is your fault, even though it's certainly not your fault. But there's a lot of second guessing that goes on. And I guess as someone who's experienced miscarriage themselves, you think about, was it this that I've done, or is it that, was there something that I did in that time that could have contributed to it? So being aware of sort of all of these factors can really help you to get a better understanding of, what can be going on, and to give yourself a little bit of that sort of, assurance that, it's not something that you've done that has caused that too. So if you are seeing a fertility specialist, you can certainly have some of the more advanced testing done, and that's probably where a lot of people need to move to, but you can certainly see your GP to have some of these things looked at as well. So I guess the first port of call would probably just be a general preconception blood test, particularly if someone hasn't had one done for a little while. So typically this would be something that we would recommend at the beginning, before you're trying to conceive. And so if you've experienced recurrent miscarriage, those preconception blood tests could be quite outdated by this stage. So if it's been sort of 12 months, definitely wanting to get those redone. And so from a nutrition point of view, we'd look at some things like your vitamin D levels, like your iron, your B12, your folate, blood glucose. There's a few other things we'd probably be looking at from a screening point of view as well, which we'll talk about too. And I guess what we can look at is if any of your nutrient markers are out of the target range, that we can intervene and help with this with a combination of diet and supplements as well. We'd also recommend getting your thyroid hormones checked, because we know that hypothyroidism is linked to risk of miscarriage. So if there's any thyroid issues that are detected, sometimes we see what we call a subclinical thyroid level. So they're not at that sort of level that would be your diagnostic of having hypothyroid, but they might kind of be somewhere in the middle and we definitely would potentially look at intervening on that, looking at things like your iodine intake and your selenium intake and possibly supplementation on some things there as well. Screening for some autoimmune conditions here. So in particular, celiac disease is something that we look at. If somebody has undiagnosed celiac disease, it reduces your ability to absorb those nutrients that are really essential for pregnancy. So if somebody has celiac disease, we'd also want to make sure that they're adhering to their gluten-free diet very much rigidly, just to ensure that that is well managed too. Lupus is another of those autoimmune conditions that we could get screened for as well, which we know increases our miscarriage risk. And one that is something else we could potentially look at is the MTHFR genetic mutation. So I know we've had a previous podcast all about MTHFR, but just as a quick summary, it's an enzyme which activates folate in the body so that folate can go on and do the many jobs that are so important in early conception. So if somebody has a mutation to the MTHFR gene, you could actually be deficient in folate because your body can't convert that synthetic folate into its active form, and that can increase the risk of miscarriage too. So that's just something else to consider in the testing line, and then that's something else that we'd certainly look at from a diet and supplementation point of view to help people to manage that. Sometimes some people's hormone levels will need to be looked at. In particular, we think about progesterone, especially in making sure that there's enough progesterone in that second phase of the menstrual cycle to support the implantation of an embryo. And some people might require some progesterone support there medically. So that's something else that we can have a look at too. Another type of testing that can be done is something called karyotype testing. And this does look for those chromosomal abnormalities in both parents. And so if this is something that is detected, it can cause the chromosomal abnormality in the embryo potentially. So it's really just being aware of sort of those things that might be playing a role as well. And probably one that we haven't really focused on too much, but is for males in particular having a semen analysis done too. And so it's really important that both the male and the female are getting things checked out, because it is very much 50-50 ball game. And if someone's having a semen analysis done and there is recurrent miscarriage, I would highly recommend getting a DNA fragmentation test done on that sperm as well, as this is a really common cause of recurrent miscarriage too. So it's not part of your standard sperm analysis, but something I would recommend gets added on to get that checked out as well. We could also have a look if there's any anatomical abnormalities in the uterus. So this could be things like fibroids or scar tissue in the uterus that can prevent a successful implantation. And there could also be some underlying conditions like endometriosis, adenomyosis, endometritis, PCOS, thrombophilia, all of which can increase your risk if they're not diagnosed and treated properly too. So there's definitely lots of things, as you can see, that we're looking at getting checked out. Another one that's been a pretty hot topic lately has been NK or natural killer cells. And sometimes if these cells elevated, they can be linked to an increased risk of miscarriage. So I guess it's important to know that NK or natural killer cells are a natural part of the body's immune defense system. So while they sound like they're terrible and they probably shouldn't be there, they are actually part of a healthy immune defense. But when these levels are higher than they should be, sometimes these cells can attack the embryo instead of letting the embryo implant, because it recognizes a foreign body instead of something that should be there. So if those levels are detected to be too high, then this is certainly something that a fertility specialist would be helping you to manage and bring down prior to trying for another pregnancy as well. And it tends to be more common in people who've got underlying inflammatory conditions or an active immune system as well. So from a nutrition point of view, managing that underlying inflammation, I think, is something really important that we do too. Checking for infections is another important one, including any STI or STD screening if that hasn't been completed prior to conception. Bacterial vaginosis or thrush is another important one. And generally speaking, those things are quite easily treated. So testing and getting treatment for those things are really important. And look, I think there's obviously a huge list of things to check out. We certainly go through all of these things with all of our clients and help them to make sure they're getting tests from a medical point of view as well. So we know if there's an underlying reason, there's generally something we can do to help it. And this helps us to go on to have a higher rate of successful pregnancies if we can deal with those underlying things, which I think is really important for a lot of our clients.
Absolutely. And what a thorough overview of all the potentials. And I think the thing is that because miscarriage and pregnancy loss is so synonymous with chromosomal abnormalities, there's just this lack of sometimes, there's a lack of drive sometimes to really dig deeper beyond that. And it's not to say that those are not incredibly common and that chromosomal abnormalities would probably explain a large number of pregnancy losses. But I think it's the assumption that it's just a chromosomal abnormality. Let's not look at anything else. Just keep going. I think that's where people start to feel frustrated and a bit disenchanted by the systems that are serving them. And that's often where seeing clients is at that point, who they feel like, my doctor has given up on me, or I'm feeling like I'm not being heard. I'm feeling like everything hasn't been as thoroughly checked out as it possibly could be. So just you don't know what you don't know. Like, you're not expected to be a doctor in your own case. And so I think just even having those potentials to bring forward to an appointment and say, what about natural killer cells? Or what about my vaginal microbiome? Or what about, preconception genetic carrier screening tests or karyotyping? Or like, have we done all these things? And your doctor may have done many of these things, but you've just not been aware. Or, these are things that you can now explore. And like, should it be like that? Nah. But is it like that? The reality? Yeah. So, we're working in reality. So it's important that we equip people accordingly. So for many, they don't have answers from these types of tests. And it's a matter of just keep going, keep trying. However, as you know firsthand, Candice, trying to conceive and subsequent pregnancies after a pregnancy loss can be filled with anxiety, fear of the same outcome. Something we encourage our clients to think about is each pregnancy is a new pregnancy with a new potential outcome. It's really hard to compartmentalize, but I do find it can be a really helpful statement. Another thing that our clients find helpful to ease their anxiety is to control the controllable, which we talked about briefly. And one of those things is, of course, their diet, which when done in moderation may be otherwise generally beneficial to their preconception health, fertility, and general health anyway. What are some of your top line recommendations or considerations that's backed by the research when it comes to nutrition and recurrent miscarriage and pregnancy loss?
Yeah, it's a great question, Steph. So obviously we know nutrition is that real controllable factor in amongst those many uncontrollables that we have in the pregnancy loss space. And nothing's going to guarantee a successful pregnancy. But as a woman, you certainly want to feel like you're doing everything that is within your control for a better outcome next time. So the main things that we tend to focus on from a diet point of view, things that are going to help optimize the health of the eggs and the health of the sperm in particular. And this can assist to reduce any DNA damage that can occur due to environmental exposures. So that's sort of our main focus that we're looking at. And so our top tips to focus on would be to look at things that are really quite anti-inflammatory for our diet. So focusing on those anti-inflammatory eating principles. And we do this by eating a diet that is rich in antioxidants and reducing our intake of foods that can be pro-inflammatory in the body. So what we want to look at is things like, are we eating enough fruit and vegetables in our diet as like a basic starting point? People might think that that is very simplistic, but knowing that something like 95% of people don't eat their recommended intake of fruit and vegetables each day, it's probably a very effective strategy that we can implement. So eating around 3 serves of fruit per day and encouraging different colours in your fruit intake is really important too. So when we eat different coloured fruits and vegetables, this gives us a different or a wider variety of those antioxidants, vitamins and minerals. So we talk about eating the rainbow as being something that's really important. So looking at all of those colours. So lots of people focus on greens because we know greens are rich in folate, but we do want to make sure we're eating those reds and oranges and yellows and purples and blues and even whites because they're super important as well. So trying to have 5 serves of vegetables each day is our recommended target. So the dietary guidelines say 2 fruit and 5 veg is where we should be. From a fertility point of view, we know 3 servings of fruit per day seems to be beneficial from that side of things. And at the Dietologist, we often encourage people to aim for sort of 3 serves of veggies at lunch and 3 serves of veggies at dinner. And this is a really easy way to meet those recommendations rather than trying to pile all your vegetables into one meal. It just can be too much. But research does tell us that those who eat 14 or more serves of vegetables per week have a 40% less chance of miscarriage compared to those who only have 7 serves per week. So even if you're not quite hitting those targets, just focusing on increasing your intake can make a really huge difference in terms of your fertility health. And another one that I think we definitely love here at the Dietologist, omega-3s. So if you've worked with us or listened to the podcast before, you know that omega-3s get a mention on a number of topics that we talk about. And so definitely focusing on eating more oily fish is a really great, easy strategy to do. So things like salmon, ocean trout, mackerel, sardines, anchovies, aiming to eat oily fish 2 to 3 times per week can really boost your omega-3 intake up. And it changes your ratio of the omega-3 to omega-6s that are in our diet. A pro-inflammatory diet has a higher ratio of those omega-6s in them. And so if we're looking for more of an anti-inflammatory profile, then we want to have a higher ratio of omega-3s. So boosting up those are really important. Another thing that we can do just to boost our antioxidant intake is to use extra virgin olive oil in our cooking as salad dressings, those sorts of things, and add lots of herbs and spices, whether fresh or dried, into your meals for more antioxidants too. There's a few other things we like to look at, things like eating enough eggs to make sure we're getting enough choline in our diet is super important too. So we know choline's kind of the newest kid on the block in the fertility space, but it's certainly really important, especially in those early stages of pregnancy. And eggs are the best source in our diet. So eating, 6 to 8 or more eggs per week can be really helpful to make sure you're getting a higher intake of choline as well. Eating more plant-based protein has also been shown to be really beneficial from a fertility health point of view. So having things such as tofu or legumes into your meals or having some vegetarian meals with those as the protein source can be really helpful for your fertility too. A handful of nuts every day is a really simple strategy. Using iodized salt instead of your other salts, so any of your Himalayans or those sorts of things. Making sure we're eating enough whole grains to make sure we're building up a healthy endometrial lining. Those are sort of a lot of the fertility, top fertility tips that are sort of quick and simple things that anyone can do in their diet. And then we like to focus on what we should do more of. But if we want to think about some things that are pro-inflammatory in our diet, it's eating foods that are quite high in saturated or trans fats. So whether that be fatty or processed meats or too much packaged food like chocolates, cakes, biscuits, pastries, those sorts of things. Making sure that we're not cutting them out completely, but we've really got to watch how often and how much we eat those foods if we're really thinking about trying to reduce those inflammatory markers in our body. We look at things like caffeine and alcohol being really important, endocrine disrupting chemicals, those types of things too. And I guess that's just sort of a really quick summary of sort of the top nutrition things that we're looking at from optimizing your egg health and sperm health point of view. And then I guess a lot of our clients have underlying health conditions as well. And so there'd be completely different dietary strategies that we'd be considering from a nutrition therapy point of view to help manage those. So definitely lots to consider in the nutrition space here.
Which is exactly why we have lots of time in our consultations to unpack it all.
We need it.
Yeah, because there's a lot of blood work, there's a lot of testing, there's a lot of looking at your current diet, looking at your history, what's happened, looking at your whole lifestyle, your sleep, your bowels, all that stuff. And it takes time to unpack all of that, go into adequate detail, and then formulate your next steps. But I think something that, Candice, you've observed clinically, and we've been talking about it behind the scenes recently, is how little of the basics people are doing by the time they come to us and have already experienced a pregnancy loss. Maybe not taking the prenatal vitamin consistently, maybe not having done their preconception blood work with their GP, maybe not have considered any of these things, and then going into potentially getting pregnant again, all guns blazing, quick, run. But that moment to pause and reflect and reevaluate things is so powerful. And I think people feel so time pressured, particularly with those statistics of like, if you get pregnant again soon after a loss, it's likely to end up being a baby. And I think people just feel this, especially if you're older, this time pressure all the time. And so you just feel like, a month of doing tests and going to appointments and working on things, what a waste of time. But it's not a waste of time at all, because you've got to have far more information and feel far more confident going into that next step. So it's so important that you take that pause. Now, flipping the coin a little bit, for those who have suffered a pregnancy loss, recovering from that physical element is something that we probably don't talk much about, depending, of course, on the stage at which, a pregnancy loss occurs. But in some cases, there can be a lot of blood loss. So you've got loss of iron. There can be a lot of fatigue. Of course, the emotional elements that affect your eating, whether that be not eating much at all, or overeating and binge eating, or emotional eating, or the use of certain medications that can affect your ability to absorb certain nutrients that have helped the miscarriage to occur if it's been a missed miscarriage. So what's your advice for those who are thinking about post-loss nutritional support?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess, a lot of the focus is sort of on the mental health side of things after a miscarriage, but we have to consider that there's a lot that's gone on physically in the body. You have had a pregnancy occur, and so there's been a lot of changes in your body that come along with that. So definitely we'd recommend reviewing things like your iron levels in particular, because these can be quite depleted after a miscarriage. And so if you are planning to try to conceive again soon after, then we need to restore and correct that, ideally prior to another pregnancy happening. And I guess we want to think about things like whether we need to have additional folate supplement, particularly if methotrexate has been used, because this does deplete your folate stores. And so taking additional folate for potentially around 3 or more months can be an important strategy that we need to look at, just to make sure you've got adequate folate stores to support a healthy pregnancy too. And then things like keeping an eye on our B12 levels are really important. And so we can certainly do all of those analyses and manage those with a combination of diet and supplements as well. And I guess emotional eating is probably something else that can come along post-miscarriage as well. So, emotional eating is something that, people do, and everyone is different. So when some people are stressed out, they don't eat very much at all. And other people, when they're stressed out, might overconsume food or eat more treat type foods than they might normally as well. So we want to consider whether this is something that is happening sort of chronically long term or whether it's just a short term coping mechanism. And I think if it's something that is kind of short term, and then that's not really a problem. I think that's probably more of a normal coping mechanism. But if it is something that is ongoing and it is actually a problem for a person, then it's something that we need to deal with, and it's something that we do see a lot in our clinic as well. And so I guess if we think about someone who is under eating, they may not be getting enough nutrients in their body to support another healthy pregnancy. So it's thinking about, what do we need to do to help someone manage that stress to be getting adequate nutrition in as well. And I guess if someone is over consuming food, then it's thinking about, well, what are some of the things that we can do to help not use food as the coping mechanism? And probably alcohol goes along with that as well. So some people might drink to manage stress, those sorts of things. And so I guess we'd be looking at, well, what are the things that we can do to help in that end? I think when someone's experiencing pain, the main thing that someone is trying to do is move out of that pain and towards something pleasurable. And that's where, chocolate and wine and those sorts of things definitely are what we can very easily turn to. And so it's about, well, let's find some other strategies for people that can help with that too. And everyone's different in terms of what's going to make them feel good and get them into a better space mentally. But it's having those conversations and identifying those patterns that somebody has around these things that we really want to work on. And I guess we need to get back to, certainly when someone's experienced a pregnancy loss, and particularly recurrent pregnancy loss, there's a lot that sits behind that. And we need to work with people to think, well, what is the end goal here? And if someone's coming to see us, it's usually because they want to try to conceive again. And so we need to be having those conversations, in particular around, well, what is this going to do to the quality of our eggs and the chances of our having a healthy pregnancy down the track too. So it's thinking about all of those things. And it could just be that someone needs a bit of a break after a loss, and that's okay as well. So someone might need to take, a couple of months off, to give themselves a bit of space to sort of reset before they try again. And that's perfectly okay too. We have to look at things whether, some people might stop taking their supplements because they need that break. So that's okay as well. But we need to think about, well, if you're going to be trying to conceive again, we really want those supplements to commence sort of 3 months before you try to conceive again as well. So thinking about the timing of things and just working with people with where they're individually at is really important for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that individual conversation is so key because some people will feel this sense of distancing and some people will feel this sense of increased urgency. I've seen both occur. Sometimes people become perhaps unexpectedly pregnant. Not that they weren't planning, but maybe they're pregnant slightly sooner than what they expected. And then they sadly face a loss and they go, God, that made me realize how much I really want to be pregnant. Like, I just really want this now. Like, now that I've gone through this, like, yes, it's awful, but I've just got this renewed vigor to like really pursue pregnancy. And for other people, they feel like, oh, I just need a moment to breathe because the thought of having to fortify myself again to go forward, and our brain, of course, anticipates that the same outcome will occur. You need that time and that space, and that's okay. Go on a holiday or do whatever you can do. Doesn't have to be a fancy holiday. Go away somewhere and rejig your brain space can be really. Not go and have a holiday and have a baby. That's not where that's coming from. But I recorded another episode last week with Robin, which should come out soon. And she talked about her own personal experience and, with IVF. And one of her moments, her WTF moments, was she needed to get away. And that gave her so much perspective. And so I think there's so much value in that as well.
Yeah.
Candice, any words of wisdom to leave our listeners when it comes to recurrent pregnancy loss generally or nutrition? I know as well you've had your own personal experiences, so fusing that clinical brain of yours and, of course, having sadly gone through your own experiences with this, what's your words of advice to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing is making sure that you've got a support network and that you're not doing it completely alone. I think there seems to be a lot of stigma around miscarriage and pregnancy loss, and there can even be like that feeling of shame, which I think is really important to acknowledge, that surrounds miscarriage and being something women don't want to talk about. And it's okay if you don't want to talk about it, but you need to have someone there that you can lean on. And for some people, that might be your partner, but you might need some people that sort of sit outside of that as well. And I think it's important to give yourself the space to feel what you need to feel and do what you need to do. I know everyone is different. Some people want to get straight back into things, and it is that right next, let's go, what do we need to do? And some people need, you know, that break to reset, and whatever you need is okay. And I think it's really important that the people around you understand that as well and know where you're at. So that communication is super important. But I think you really need a great medical team as well, especially with recurrent miscarriage, because, you know, when it's something that you're experiencing, you want people to take your concerns seriously, and you want people to investigate things for you, and you don't want to be turned away to say, oh no, don't worry about that, or that's something we'll do later. You need someone that's willing to listen to your concerns, take them seriously, and, you know, if there's something that they don't think needs to be checked, that maybe they explain to you why that is as well, and not just sort of flick you off too. So your medical team is super important. And obviously we are going to say that your dietitian is super important in this space too, because as you can see, there are so many nutrition factors that can be related to miscarriage. And it is that one thing that, you know, we have complete control over what we put in our mouth each day, and therefore, like, it's something that you can actually feel really good about, and it can really help you to sort of feel like you're more in control of your situation and what you're doing. And having the peace of mind, sort of know that you're doing everything that you can regardless of the next outcome, I think makes a really big difference as well. And when you have had everything investigated well, when you're getting all of the information that you need to make the best decisions, that's where you're going to be feeling your best mentally moving forward into a future possible pregnancy. So I think we need to acknowledge it's really scary trying again. There's a lot of hope, but there's also a lot of fear and anxiety kind of every step of the way. And that's completely normal. And, you know, having people by your side that understand that is really important. So, you know, feeling the hope and the fear together and knowing that you're doing the very best that you can is super important in this space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that navigating pregnancy after infertility and loss episode that we did last season with Jennifer Robertson is just, I just constantly am sending that to my clients, because we really do fall into the milestone trap of, it'll be okay once I do the dating scan, I'll feel more at ease. Oh, it'll be okay once we get to 12 weeks and I'll feel more at ease. Oh, it'll be okay once I'm at 20 weeks. Oh, it'll be okay once I know I've got a planned C-section. Or the thing is that anxiety is transferable to when your child is here.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, and so if you're feeling yourself sliding down that slippery dip of it'll be okay when, I think seeking some support around that is so key. And that's what we dive into that episode, which I'll leave linked. And I know we also have a previous episode talking about nutrition and miscarriage and a blog post from a while ago. So I'll leave those below. But I think this episode was far more comprehensive thanks to Candice's input. And once again, for those that do need additional support when it comes to pregnancy loss, please reach out. Please see your healthcare provider. I highly recommend connecting with the Pink Elephant Support Network for free support. Check out Jennifer Robertson's Instagram. She has incredible relatable content. She has an incredible support group for those who do get pregnant after infertility and or loss, because it is a very unique experience, and she does an incredible job with that. And just leaving you with this reminder that recurrent miscarriage can take a toll mentally, physically, and whilst diet won't save the day when it comes to preventing a loss, it can help you feel a bit better mentally, knowing that you're doing something different moving forward, and physically eating more nutritiously can obviously support your energy levels and navigate any emotional eating tendencies. So if you need support when it comes to nutrition after miscarriage, we are here to support you. Drop us an inquiry. The link is always in our show notes, and let's chat further about your situation and how we can best support you inside one of our one-on-one coaching programs. Thanks for joining joining us, Candice.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back again.
My pleasure. And thanks everyone for tuning into this episode. Don't forget to follow on your favorite podcast streaming platform, whatever app you're listening in. Go and hit the follow button right now. And whilst you're there, leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This makes the world of difference to getting us into new ear holes each and every week. So please do share it around, share the love, share it with someone who might find it useful. And until next time, everyone, bye. Fertility Friendly Food, the podcast, acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises the continuing connections to lands, waters and community. We pay our respects to First Nation cultures and to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations people tuning in today. This podcast is recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.